So I think we'll go ahead and get started. Let's hope some strategies come through. But thank you for coming. Thank Austin for coming up. A couple of just things. Last time we did this, we did kind of a question and answer. We don't have the time to do question and answer today just because of the candidate meter after this. So hopefully your questions are answered as Austin goes through what's going on. If not, Austin will stay for a little bit afterwards, and so if you're not part of the District 4 or 5 candidate meeting, you can go out and ask some questions, or we can take emails and send it. You can send some questions into the website, which is ogdenvalleycharter.com. If you have questions, we're happy to get those answered. Just during this 5 minutes or so, we don't really have the time.
Also, Instagram.
Instagram.
You can message me on Instagram. I'm the one running that.
And we also, so we're going to be passing around this. You can put your name here. You can say if you want emails, check yes. If you want to add your name to supporters, check yes. If you don't know yet, hopefully we'll convince you or ask questions. And yes.
If we are to receive your emails, should we still sign that?
If you don't want, it'd be like to have your name.
Okay.
Yeah. If you don't want us to give you an email, you don't have to give
No,
your
if
email.
we're already getting your emails.
Oh.
There's two questions on here.
Yeah.
The first one is, can we add your name to the list of supporters on the website? And that's on the left. You can check the box for that. And then the one on the right is, do you want us to receive emails? And if you've already opted in for emails, then maybe just check the one on the left if you're in favor of a charter.
So I'll pass this around. There's also one in the back, but we'll pass this around during. I think that's it. Awesome.
All right, thank you. And I guess just tell me, let's see, tell me when we get to 60 days. Yeah, I recognize a number of you. Been up here before, so thanks for having me back. You are now on the path to electing your city leadership, so hopefully you have some good people that you're looking at. But yes, last time when I was here talking about charters, there were so many questions. Some people got frustrated that we didn't get through all the content. So they're trying it the opposite way this time of content, and then you can just do questions after. And again, that's trying to respect the 7 o'clock meeting too. And we appreciate those in charge of 7 o'clock meeting last time before.
Sorry to interrupt, Austin.
Yep.
But I think we need to wrap up at 6:55.
Yep.
Yeah.
So he's going to tell me the time.
This is very hard for me. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
He's just so good at
fortunately we have,
questions too.
fortunately the courts give attorneys time limits too. And so that's the hardest thing about being an attorney, is sticking to the time limits the judge gave or takes them. But I will try and do it. And so the charter, I like to think of the charter like a city constitution. And the neat thing about it is that you can look and anticipate things that might happen and put some protections in place. So the founding fathers were wise enough to look at our country and say, hey, what are the things that could happen if we do this? And they put checks and balances in place. I'm a huge fan of checks and balances, and it's something I talk about often, promote often, encourage often. And so we'll go through at least 12 types of things you could consider. And it's not to say it's fully right or fully wrong or anything. I guess as an aside, I'm not from your area. I don't know all the things here. I just have been told some things, picked up on things from different meetings. But the next thing about a city charter is that it trumps all conflicting ordinances. And this is true under the Utah Constitution. We'll see this in a second. If there have been ordinances passed and then you pass a charter, it will supersede all those previous ordinances and replace those that conflict with it. So the charter is powerful for good and bad, because again, if you do it wrong, it can hurt your city. So that is one thing to understand. But we won't go through all of this. They have a really good website that some people put together. It has a lot of information on the Ogden Valley Charter. And it answers a lot of this. But the right to form a charter comes from the Utah Constitution. And it's the Utah Constitution that spells it out. And we've had, I think, a whole whopping one city in Utah take advantage of this so far. So
Just
if you
one?
do it, just one in Utah that we know of.
Why do you think that's the case?
That was a question I anticipated. I think it's the case because my opinion about Utah is we're trusting. We're a highly trusting culture, and we don't think there'll be any problems. We're just like, people do the right thing, it's all good. And I think the last maybe 4 to 8 to 10 years, they're starting to challenge that assumption for a lot of Utahns. You're starting to think a little bit differently about that, and they're not as trusting anymore. And they're realizing that, wait, trust worked for a time. You know, it was, even if you think about the founding fathers, they had one of the checks and balances that they put in was the oath of office. It actually meant something. It was a check and balance at the time. Nowadays, the oath of office, I don't believe, is a check and balance at all for anybody. I shouldn't say anybody. I'm sure there's someone there's a couple people that probably said, I took an oath, I'm going to do the right thing. But I just mean overall for the system at large, it's not a check on the system anymore. It doesn't work for just a trust thing. So this is the same thing, Black's Law Dictionary said this, but Utah Constitution says this, it supersedes an existing charter and all laws affecting the organization and government of such city which are now in conflict therewith. So it takes precedent, you get this, and the city can't pass ordinances that conflict with it in the future. Or if there's processes in place and if they have to follow those processes for that ordinance to be effective. And the one big limitation to a charter is the legislature still has the power to pass laws that apply to all cities. And so long as the law applies to all cities, it can supersede your charter. So if you say, for example, we don't want to put in high-density housing, and the legislature later comes out with a law that says all cities have to put in high-density housing, that will supersede your charter. So that's something, you can't look at this as something that controls the legislature necessarily. This is to control your city.
And I'm sorry, just because I know your time is limited, questions as you go. So the legislature, I think, took over some zoning from Park City to get the project through. If they had had a charter, would the city regulations still hold up versus the state's targeted?
Yeah, so a state can't target a city with a charter. They have to pass it for all cities.
That's amazing.
So that's one of the things, is the Constitution says the state can supersede when it's all cities they're regulating, but they can't target a charter city with just something for that city that conflicts with the charter.
All cities without exception? Every time?
So let's go into the law that says it depends. The Constitution says all cities equally, but does that mean all class 1 cities equally or all class 5 cities equally, or however they divide that up? That's for a judge to still decide. We haven't litigated this because we have one charter city in Utah. So there are some areas that aren't fleshed out simply because the Constitution doesn't fully specify. A judge could narrow it and say, oh, that's all class 1 cities. And as long as it's, you're in the class that's regulated, then okay. But that's a debate for another day, but currently it just says all cities. And then yes, just because it's on here, it doesn't mean it's a good idea for you. This is to spur thoughts. So one that's interesting to think about is, do you want to have more ability to have referendums? Utah makes it very hard to have a referendum, which could be a good thing if you have a very strong Republican form of government. But if your government's going a little bit off the rails, how do you bring that in? And you can make the process simpler than Utah does. Or I don't think you'd be able to make it harder because that law applies to all cities, so it would supersede your charter. But you can make it simpler and make it so that there can be referendums. One of the things that you could do is say, for example, if they're going to appoint a city manager, it goes to the people for approval. You could just say that the people have to approve certain positions in the city, if you want. That's that's one. It doesn't have to be a referendum that you're signing, it can be something that goes to the people for a vote. And this is one that, you know, let's say that you had one that they wanted to do a big zoning change. You could say the council has to approve it, but certain zoning changes also have to go to the people for approval too. That slows things down, but that might be what you want, that might not be what you want. You know, so those are some things to look at to say, hey, if you're gonna take, and you're gonna do a zoning change on more than 50 acres of land, that's gotta go to people, or whatever. You can start to look at that, you can look at your city, you can look at sizes, you can put things like that in place to have those extra checks and balances there. And I think that this is something I would love to have in place in cities, is anything too big or too whatever that they want to put through, it's just triggered and goes to the people if it's over a certain size or a certain change. I would love that in my city. I know that Sugar House, for example, they had a developer come in that wanted to create a second skyscraper site in Salt Lake Valley. And they want to build skyscrapers in Sugar House. And people are very upset because the city council has the sole power to decide if they're going to build skyscrapers in Sugar House or not. And there's a lot of heat over it, but the people, they didn't put anything in place and they're just left to trust. You know, essentially what we're looking at. One concept I really like, personally, this is one that I want to push across the state, is that any proposed ordinance has to be public for a certain amount of time before it can be voted on. This gives you time to see it, time to understand that it's there, time for people to talk about it. And what they do at the legislature right now in Utah is the last week of the legislative session, they'll suddenly have a bill pop up. The next morning, they're voting on it because they suspended the rules, and it's not going to committee and things. And you have no time to gather, no time to do anything, and they just push it through. And I go, when we're talking about Republic form of government, we need time as a people to have notice of it, to be able to see it with technology. I don't think there's any reason why something can't be online for 30 days before it's voted on, for example. I doubt there's that many ordinances that will be emergency ordinances in your city that just need to be passed right away. So that's one to think about. Another one that I really like too is currently, if you're communicating with the Utah legislature, you will email a representative or text a representative or call them. But if you have really valid points about a bill or language in the bill or something, it goes to that one representative, but they can control if they're going to share it with everyone else or not. If you have an online public comment tool where everyone can just put their comments, then everybody can see it, every person voting on it can see it, and your good information can be shared very quickly and very easily. And I think that's a necessary thing, because a lot of the things that come through can be complex, they can take knowledge, and you don't always know. And they actually have these public comment tools already in use. The Utah Administrative Rules Act, where they pass rules through agencies, they put things out for public comment, and they have the public comment tools. Utah Supreme Court uses it for proposed changes to rules of evidence and things. So these software tools are out there. It would cost your city a little bit more, but it makes it very hard for anyone to claim, oh, I didn't know, because you put it there, you have the time to comment, and then you have that there too. So that's a couple ideas. Another one is you can actually, specifically the Constitution says you can reduce or enlarge city powers. You can change the power of a mayor. You can create 2 mayors if you want to. You can do different things like that if you feel there's a need to create a little more check and balance. And you can say, for example, our city doesn't have the power to take on debt. Now that could be bad for you, because then everything's a tax obligation in that year because you can't borrow. But there are things like in Utah, one of the things we love to do in Utah is issue a lease revenue bond. I don't know if any of you know what those are. If your city wants to build, let's say, a new building for the Olympics, and they need a bond for it, and they come out and say, hey, will you approve this bond? And you voters say, no, we don't want the bond. They can still do it through what's called a lease revenue bond, where Utah code allows government entities to enter into lease obligations without voter approval. so they will have a separate entity build the thing that they wanted to build, and then they'll enter into a lease agreement. And then you have to, and then they can finance that through debt because they're paying the lease payment instead of the debt payment. And they've circumvented voters on this many times in Utah through the lease revenue bond. Voters will say no, and they just go set up a separate entity, do the lease revenue bond, and completely go around that protection that was supposed to be in place through Utah code. So, on the debt side, if you are going to go there, I would suggest being wise about it. You know, maybe saying we don't take on debt that exceeds X amount of our income without voter approval or whatever. But you probably have situations where they need to be able to borrow to cover shortfalls and things. Another one is you can encourage your local things you want or things you don't want. And you know, if you go to a city like Bear Lake and you book a room there, hotel or Airbnb or something, they're charging a pretty penny in taxes because cities with tourism have learned that you can make tourists, people outside your city, pay for everything in your city. And people will always book the room and just pay whatever the tax is, and so you have a pretty high tax rate for tourism if you want. If you like agriculture and want to keep that, again, one of the questions is, do you want it in your charter? Because will people always want to farm, and will it stick you in that? Will you want to be able to sell it off at some point? Do you want to discourage high-density housing and put in protections? For example, what if the people had approved high-density housing today? Those are some things. Let's see here. Can you mute her? I can try to mute. Here we go. Hey, thanks. And then also on just general land preservation, you can have aspects of that working things where you want to promote land preservation or land use to certain types. This one, you can focus on removing or appointing city officials. You can put in extra requirements. We only want people who have been resident of the city for 10 years, for example. Maybe that limits your pool too much. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe they need signatures from 100 people in the city before they can get on the ballot. You know, you can add requirements in to make sure that there's more support if you want. Sometimes people feel that this just makes it so that those with more money get in. Sometimes they feel it helps community support. Again, those are things to talk through. But let's see. This is an interesting one to think about, that if you have a recall election where you can actually kick someone out if they're going bad, could you veto votes for the 2 months preceding the initiation of the recall election? I mean, they've gone off the rails, you're going, wow, they're just voting like crazy, so we need to recall, and it just undoes those votes. Now, whether a court would fully uphold all these things or not, that's another thing to look at. Again, these are untested waters to an extent. But these are interesting checks and balances. In Utah, we don't have the ability to really remove a rogue government official right now. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. But that is one that you could consider if you want a recallability. And this one specifically, we're going to talk a little more about conflict and ethical provisions. But if an officer has violated their oath of office or violated ethical requirements that are either in city ordinance, state law, or in your charter, give an ability to remove them. We don't have that. It's this fascinating thing about Utah. You have these officials, they can violate things and they can just sit there and stay in office. We don't have a strong removal provision. There is the impeachment mechanism, but it takes time and stuff, and it's just one where I go, again, from the trusting perspective, we didn't really set that up. And we don't have great provisions currently in Utah. So that's one to think about. Another one that's potentially super helpful is to require that certain things go through commissions. This already exists at city levels. They'll have a planning and zoning commission, for example. They'll have maybe a commission or two. But you can require that commissions have a certain number of citizens that sit on them. You don't have to get together all the time, just when there's something before that commission, you get together, you study it, you talk to citizens. And you can put in your charter that you want to say that certain decisions have to run through the commission as well. And you can create any type of commission you want. Again, this is the most common, but you can have a finance commission that says, we're gonna raise taxes, well, it's gotta be approved by our citizen-led finance commission, that's really necessary. Area preservation, with the Olympics coming, you could have a short-term commission for the Olympics. I still think you guys can make a ton of money off the Olympics up here, if you do it right. And we'll talk about that in a minute too, of ways that you can fund your infrastructure through that. And you can make it so that commissions, the approval is required, or the commission's advisory. You tend to have more participation about anything than they're required, but have an advisory council. And then this one, I guess I mentioned it a little bit before, but it's helpful to look at what's normal growth for your city, what you want to give the city council the ability to do. In business law, when we appoint managers in an LLC or whatnot, we'll often write in the operating agreement that the manager has the authority to make decisions up to $5,000 or up to $50,000, kind of based on the size of the entity. But any decision over that has to go up to the full board to be approved. And so you can look at that with your city and say, expenditures, I was an attorney for a city in Michigan once, small city there. And, I guess I was an intern for the city attorney. They had purchased a almost $1 million fire truck, and then they decided they didn't want it anymore because it was just too expensive, and they wanted us as the attorneys to figure out a way to get it back and get their money back. It was interesting working on that. Can we just return the fire truck case? But they had some buyer's remorse. They voted on a little too quick, kind of looked through the finances, and then we're stuck trying to get rid of the fire truck. There's not a large market for this little fire truck. So again, you can start to put in things to say, over this amount, and I would recommend you key it to inflation if you're going to do something like that. Or it could be a percent of city budget if you ever want to approve an expenditure that exceeds 10% of the city budget goes to the people, or it goes to a separate commission, or not everything has to be a vote of the full people. Some of it can be a vote of the finance committee has to approve it, or whatnot. So it is good to think through those. What do you want? Because if every vote's going to the people when you have an election and you've got 50 things on it, it's probably not going to be super intelligent voting if there's too many things on your ballot. And so you do want to limit what you're sending to the people to the really important things that people should be weighing in on, and then the other things you're probably sending to committees or commissions if you're going to do that are geared towards them focusing on it. And then taxes, I do like again, you're going to have to stomach some increase in taxes, it just happens, it's the way of all government. But I know I lived in a Granite School District for a time, and they came out and they said, hey everyone, guess what? Our buildings are now between 50 to 100 years old, and we need to replace them all. And we haven't saved a dime to replace any of them. And one of the amazing things about government, there is no requirement that they save a penny to fix anything. So they literally they want to keep taxes low. And so they don't save to replace any of the things that are coming up. So we have these huge infrastructure repair things in America, bridges, all that kind of stuff. We haven't saved a dime to repair or replace any of these things. And this is something that if you allow that to happen in your city, where you weren't putting some away, investing and saving and things, you'll suddenly have just a massive tax increase. And in the 8 years or so that we were in West Valley in Granite School District, I think our property taxes almost tripled. Just with mostly Granite School District, just going boom, 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 we're increasing property taxes so that we can build new schools, because we didn't save a dime for them. And to me, that's not a great way to run things, personally. I don't like that. But this gets,
Real quick on that point, are you saying is there a structural reason why governments, local or federal, aren't required to set aside money, or is that just an oversight, so to speak, and not?
it's an oversight.
Okay.
But Utah does allow you, if you want to, be wise, they actually have a provision in state law that applies to all cities, this is with or without a charter, that you can create a capital improvement fund, and the governing body may, in any budget period, estimate or appropriate from estimated revenue to a reserve for capital improvements for the purpose of financing future specific capital improvements. So you have to have a formal long-range capital plan. But this is where I go, if you guys are creating a city and setting this up, well, put together a capital plan. You know what bridges you have, you know what roads you have. You have these things that are going to have to be maintained. You're taking over maintenance now from the county on a bunch of things. So you say, okay, what has to be replaced in 10 years? What has to be replaced in 15 years? How much is it going to cost? And this is where I go, use the Olympics to pay for all this. You could tax the tourists like crazy, and you could put it all in this capital improvement fund. And when those expenses come up, you've got money sitting there to rebuild the bridge. You've got money sitting there to repave the road. Because you created a long-term plan, and you're going to have a way better tax scenario if you do something like that. Otherwise, the pressure is on city council always, on all government, to spend as little as possible. They want to cut taxes, they don't want to, do things. And so if you're going to go, oh, we want to put $1 million a year towards stuff, you're going to go, oh, our taxes are high enough, kick that can down the road. That's the general consensus. That's why most governments don't do it. Because if people don't, they're like, we'll just deal with that later. It's someone else's problem. And you can see that on a national scale. We just keep borrowing money. It's someone else's problem. They'll pay it off. But your city, again, can be very different. And in 10 years, you can be in a crazy different spot than other cities with your taxes if you do something like this. So that's an option to incorporate that, tie that charter to that, and put that in place. And then this one, this is an interesting one. Oregon went down this road, cities in Oregon. They started requiring that, so this is something that the Supreme Court upheld as constitutional, that you can be required as a developer to set aside land for certain things. So in Oregon cities, they got so much rain, they said, we are requiring that developers leave green space on at least 10-15% of the land they're trying to develop. So you always have to have green space, because when you pave something over, water flows off of it, creates floods, and you need dirt to soak up that water. And that was challenged, but the Supreme Court said, yes, cities can require these development conditions. If you want to develop land, set aside a certain amount for these types of things. And so, one of the things that happens, so for example, they built Daybreak in Salt Lake County. Thousands and thousands of homes, I don't remember how many, 13,000 or more. And the developer pays some money, they will put in some new sewer pipes and different things. But the developer did not pay for widening a lot of roads. When you bring in all those new homes, they now have a ton of congestion. And they have to widen roads, they have to do different things. And so one of the thoughts is, can you tie some of the development to say, hey, if you're going to bring in an additional 100 homes, it's going to put this much strain on the roads over the next 10 years. And you're going to contribute to our capital improvement fund some of the revenue from this that's going to help pay for these things in the future, because you are going to increase the load, which is going to increase the wear, which is going to make these things go faster. We're going to have to put in 2 lanes or whatever. That's some of what you can look at with development.
I was just going to say, with the cities can require the parks thing, there are spots already set aside for new parks in the valley. The Ogden Valley Parks and Rec have that availability right now.
Yeah, through the county.
So
Yeah, and this was just saying that from the law, legal perspective, they can require it for land, but I'm saying take the next step and require some funds to be set aside too that go into the capital improvement fund to help pay for the roads and the sewers and all that kind of stuff.
Do you know if the state will regulate how much you can put aside? So like, for example, with impact fees, you can only be proportional to the size of the development or something like that, in this case of putting funds directly into the city's capital improvements and stuff like that, is there a limit?
Not currently. You guys might make it so they want to make one, but there's not currently. And it's something that the cities just aren't doing. There's very few that are being proactive like this and thinking that way. And so it's just an issue that really hasn't come up a whole lot. And so, now this is one to think about with the elected officials.
Hold on just a sec. I'm going to pass this around again because there's a lot more people here. On this side, you check if you are in favor of a charter and if you're okay with your name being added to the website as people in favor of a charter. If you don't know yet, that's totally fine. You can add it later. And on the right, you can check if you want emails. So there you go.
And just a quick plug on that too, Ty. As many people as we get on there as possible is awesome, because with the council members being nominated here pretty soon, we want council members to be aware that there's growing interest in it, and so that as they're putting their names in the hat, that they have that in mind.
Right. And
So yeah,
if
please
the
add
city,
your name.
if the city charter is important to us, we want to be able to interview the people who are running for these different offices and know. But you're right. So we want that list to really be growing on the website of people who are in favor, so that they can see that we want this. Right.
And I guess one thing to know with that is your city council has to vote to authorize the charter.
Right.
So you have to, if you want the charter, you do have to elect people who are friendly to a charter. So that is an important
So
step.
does the charter, if it's chosen, does that have to be sort of enacted or impacted day one, week one, or is that something that can come a year down, or?
Yeah, it comes a little bit later.
Okay.
So then what happens is the city council will vote to say, are we going to create a charter commission? And I believe there's 15 people that serve on the commission. So they'll appoint 15 people that will then be tasked with actually writing the charter. And then that gets submitted to all of you to vote on. So you get a chance to vote on it. So it wouldn't happen, the earliest it could possibly happen, you'd be voting on the charter in the 2026 November election, I think. And that's why I say that if it comes into effect, it will supersede those previous ordinances that may be in conflict with it. It would take those, wipe those out essentially.
I had somebody reach out and tell me that I should have people sign petitions tonight for a charter, and I said, we can't yet, because it's the new city's commission who actually votes, they need to vote in favor.
Council.
What?
The council.
Thank you.
Yeah, city council.
The city council that needs to vote in favor, and at that point, then we figure all that out. But yeah, she's like, when people are coming, then they're excited. I'm like, hopefully this momentum continues and doesn't just die out. So just so you know, if you're excited about this, keep that excitement, because yeah, we need you.
And one of the big things is you need to, again, if you want it, you need to make sure that anyone you're voting for supports it and says that they will vote to create a charter commission. But in the meantime, if you're talking about it, if you're proposing ideas, it helps flesh them out. Because one of the important things is to take some time, put out some ideas, see what people say on it, because people may say, whoa, it's a totally bad idea because of X. I didn't think about that. You want to hear from everyone to see how it would affect them, how it would, to make sure that you're doing the right thing for your city with what you put in the charter. So it's good to take a little bit of time on it. And with this one of the ways that you could say developers can take over a city is that it's not hard when you have a city council that's not full-time. They have to have their work, right? So they're working for someone or something. It's really easy in Utah to pay someone for consulting services, and it's just a valid business expense. So I just hired a plumber down the street. I wasn't paying him for a bow. But what happens, and it's common, there's a couple things that happen to city council or even state. This happens at the state level too. They'll get paid consulting fees from people, and they become friendly to them. You generally tend to be very friendly to people paying money. It's just a natural thing that happens. You want to keep that client, you want to keep that money. The other thing that happens is city council members will be appointed to serve on boards. And then you're serving on a board board with the people or the organization or whatever that's coming and asking for things. And so if you're an organization and you want something, one very simple way to try and get an in with a government body is to ask one of the people to serve on your board. It's not, again, it happens all the time. It's something you know. And so you can start to put in conflict standards and ethical standards that say things such as, you can't serve on a board of any group that has anything to do with their city. For example, if you're a city government. It's an interesting thing to put in. At the beginning, at the outset, someone running for office won't care about that. The person in office will care quite a bit about it. So these are some of the things you got to get through at the start. Because before office, you don't know, no one's paying me money right now, it's fine. No one's appointing me to be on board, it's fine. But once you're in and suddenly you have all that attention and people are asking to do things, you feel a little different about it. And it's very common for humans to feel like they can manage the conflict. That's a natural thing. You believe, oh, I'm okay, I'm separating it out, I'm compartmentalizing things. And maybe they are, I'm not saying that everyone can't. But the tendency overall to the system tends to start to reward the money and the interest. And so one of the things that I would love to start doing throughout Utah is putting more of these protections in place. That you can't be a government official and be serving on boards and taking money from groups who are lobbying. And it gets a little difficult to manage if you're at the state level. How do you not have a job in the state? You have to have a job, you take money from someone. So there's some give and take on how to do that. But at your city level, this is a lot easier to do. To have things like this, to say you're not going to take consulting services or whatnot. With me as an attorney, if I were on the city council, they could just hire me as their attorney. And then I'm not consulting, I'm just doing my job. So again, it gets hard. But you could also put in things such as, well, we can't stop all money from coming in because Austin has to have a job. But we will require that if any of your clients comes before the city council, you and your client have to disclose the relationship. And maybe that's something to say, Austin's removed from all voting if any of his clients are there. He can't even discuss it type thing. And so you can look through some of this and say, we really want to make sure that when people are making decisions, they're doing it because of what they feel is right, not because of money coming in or boards they're serving on or whatnot. And put some of that in place. And then again, if you go back to the one about removing city officials who violate these things, if you are going to put these types of protections in, you do need to have some mechanism for removal or even overriding of legislation of city ordinances that are passed in violation of that. So if they didn't disclose something, does it make the ordinance void? So then both sides have an incentive to disclose. You'll have to decide on what those are. Now this is one that has taken over almost all of Utah. Very few people know about it. But almost every government entity in Utah has created a corollary nonprofit. And it's deeply concerning to me. And so it's one I want to bring up with you in your city to know about. They've exempted nonprofits, governmental nonprofits, from GRAMA and from open meeting requirements. So under so GRAMA is the Government Records Access Management Act, or whatever they call it. It allows you to request government records and get insight into what's going on, who's meeting with who, who's making decisions. But if you're a governmental nonprofit, your records aren't subject to inspection. People can't get them. It's just now in the dark. If you are a governmental nonprofit, you aren't subject to Open Meetings Act, which requires that decisions and meetings be made in public with public there listening, participating. And so what's happening at a lot of the government levels, this is state down to cities, down to water districts, all kinds of things, the city council gets appointed to serve on the board of the nonprofit. But they're not in their government position, they're in a nonprofit position. So they meet behind closed doors, they're not subject to GRAMA. They could be meeting with all kinds of developers, people with money, who knows what. You just don't know. And then they hash out all the details. They'll come out with this incredible plan, and then it will appear, and they'll say, we're going to vote on this public this coming Thursday, and the public shows up and says, what are you doing? This is crazy. You're approving a skyscraper here. But you can tell they've negotiated for a long time because it's so detailed, there's all this stuff. And the city council listens to you yell at them for a minute, and then they say no more questioning, no more comments, take a vote, and they all approve it. And that's what's happening. Very extensively. Very, very extensively. And currently it's completely legal because they can create these nonprofits to do these things. Because they're not the ones actually making the decision. They're just doing all the work behind the scenes. But they've got, if you go look at it, there's a league of cities and towns that your city will be pushed to join. It's one of these nonprofits, you don't get information from it. It's there telling the cities and towns what they need to do, how to do it. Who knows what's going on? They have them for county prosecutors. They have a nonprofit for county prosecutors, where county prosecutors get together, they each serve in it, they make decisions together, do things together, and we have no idea what's going on. So, again, if you do this, if you say our government can create these, or another, maybe the city attorney's going, no, you have to have a nonprofit for liability reasons, whatever. Well, then maybe what you do is say, well, any governmental nonprofits fully subject to grandma and open meeting laws, and we treat it just like we do a government entity for purposes of disclosure and things. But you will be the only city that I know of that wouldn't be doing this. So you'd be this interesting black sheep of a place if you were to do it, but it may make you also the light on the hill that's the coolest city in the world because everyone knows what's going on. I don't know. But I have a lot of concerns for the shadow laws that they use. And then ethics. We talked some about these, but what ethical provisions do you expect of your people up here? When I was running for Attorney General, one of the things that I said I wanted to do was anyone that came and asked me for a favor, I just wanted to have a public list and said, this person asked me for a favor, this person asked me for a favor. And again, you can have ethical provisions like that to say, hey, you need to disclose these things, or hey, everything has to be on city email. You can't use your personal email ethically. If we find out you've been using your personal email, here's how we can kick you out. Because that's another way people get around grandma. We had that with the AG this last year. The last 2 years now, they've been trying to get his records. I don't know if you followed the AG debate, trying to get the access to the AG's calendar. And what he said is, well, I do personal things on this calendar, and you're not supposed to have that, and all this stuff. And ultimately what ended up happening was that he was ordered to produce his calendar, but he said, well, under the law, I don't have to disclose attorney-client privilege stuff. I have a lot of attorney-client privilege stuff on here. But the concerning thing that the news just kind of glossed over is the attorney-client privilege he was claiming was with private parties. These weren't with meetings with it wasn't with the driver's license division, for example. He was claiming these. Because why do you need a calendar to hide your calendar that you're meeting with the driver's license division? Well, who cares? He hid crazy numbers of meetings with private individuals under the claim that it was attorney-client privilege. The Utah legislature, as they were looking at the AG, said they passed a new law because they went through and audited. And this one was just quietly slid through, but it said the Attorney General is no longer allowed to engage in the private practice of law. So think about that. Up till that time, our Attorney General was representing private people on the side and didn't want to disclose to any of us who those people were. Fought it tooth and nail for 2 years. And so these are some of the things, again, where I go, well, let's just learn from where we've been in Utah. We've seen some things now, we've seen some things around the nation. Do you want to put some ethical standards in place?
So who enforces all this?
The ethical standards? It's a great question. So who enforces it? That's something that you have to put in place, is who do you want to enforce it? Do you want it to be your city attorney that enforces it? Do you want the citizens to be able to call convene a jury and say, hey, we're accusing you initiating on it. There's all kinds of checks and balances you'd have to consider. But one of them is, that I would recommend, is having a way for the citizens, if the government's doing nothing, because they all say, I like Bob, I'm not gonna do anything about Bob. You need a way as citizens to be able to initiate something. That's one of the things we have learned, and again, in my time of looking at the Attorney General's office, one of the things that does not happen in Utah, government officials do not enforce the law against government officials. It's very rare, unless they were molesting kids or doing something like that. That's really bad. But if they're violating ethical provisions or whatnot, there's very little enforcement against other government officials. They tend to be friends. Understandably, here in your city, it's going to be close. The city attorney will know, the mayor will know, the council, they're all going to work close together. And it's difficult for them to initiate things. So, again, anything you do put in place, you want to have a citizen provision mechanism to trigger something, whether it's to say recall election, or whether it's to say grand jury. You can claim a grand jury right as a city. The federal government has a grand jury provision. We're going to bring them in. There'll be a private meeting, but we'll call in a jury of citizens. They have our allegations.
Is that, excuse me, is that with or without a charter? Like, to be able to call that grand jury of citizens?
You would need a charter to.
Charter, okay. So this is within a charter that it's possible.
So I went kind of quick through them because I was trying to get through in time, which I think I made it through in time here. And so we will have time for a few questions if you want to ask them. We have 10 minutes left. But curious if you have other ideas, other thoughts, other things that popped in your mind. You go, well, what about this? Can we do this? Or specific concerns, areas you want to see protected. What are ways to protect them?
Do you think we could regulate campaign finance through this for donations to candidates? By limiting donations, perhaps?
Yeah, great question. So the question was, can you limit donations? Can you control money? The answer is you can pass, the charter can implement constitutional campaign finance restrictions. But campaign finance has been heavily litigated. There's thousands of cases about what can and can't be restricted. And your charter cannot take a anti-First Amendment stance. And so limiting the donation amount to a candidate has been constitutionally upheld as permissible at certain levels to prevent corruption. So there's an anti-corruption interest. But you can't limit, for example, it's unconstitutional to limit independent expenditures, which are considered to be an expenditure by an individual who do not coordinate with the candidate. So if I choose to go put up a billboard and I say, I want Mayor Rob to be the next mayor, and I spend $1 million on that billboard, nobody can stop me because it's my money, I'm spending it independently. And the Supreme Court has interpreted the First Amendment to not allow that to be restricted. But you can have caps on donations to candidates, things like that. And so we have that at the federal level. And it's interesting to understand how that works. The federal level says we cap donations to candidates, so we have this anti-corruption interest. But the law expressly exempts two groups from the donation limitations. Do you know who they are?
PACs.
It's not PACs. They're also limited in their donation amount. Not churches, it's the Republican and Democrat Party. They give a candidate as much money as they want to. And so, if I give a candidate a lot of money, there's a corruption interest, but if the Republican Party gives a candidate a lot of money, no corruption there. So the parties have a lot of power because we've created that exception in the campaign finance laws. So just a random tidbit to throw out. But good question. But if you're going to do that, you would have to consult with the First Amendment attorney because you wouldn't want your city sued over things that have been held to be unconstitutional.
So it sounds like this charter has the ability to be pretty broad. Is there like a starting template? I mean, how do you start one of these things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my recommendation is to say, I would say pick your top 5 concerns. You're not going to get everything in a charter. List your top 5 concerns though, put them out there and start to see what other people's top 5 concerns are. And you can kind of coalesce around certain topics, and then you start defining it. Now, Utah only has one city that's doing a charter, but there's cities across the country that have no charters. And Kyle's done some work, looked up charters around the country, and found some really good ones that can serve as templates. And so you should probably throw those up on the website.
There's one on the website right now.
Is there one there? But you can throw up some of those examples. You can see what people have done as charters. You can say, oh, that's a really good idea, I didn't think about it. But
I've been reading through some of the ethical provisions in charters, just trying to see what other cities do as far as ethics and things go.
yeah, and it is good to look at some of these other cities. But generally, to know, you need to know what you care about. That's where you start. You just get the ideas. What do you care about? What do you want to address? What is most people going to be comfortable voting for? Because again, if you have a concern that no one else shares, and you try and force it into the charter, it may make it so people don't vote for the charter. And so the charter is this kind of balanced thing of saying, well, as a community as a whole, what are the top 4 or 5 things we really care about? How do we get those in? So you start that discussion. This is the same recommendation I have with bill drafting or ordinance drafting. People often ask me, Austin, will you draft this bill for me? I say, actually, all we have to do right now is just articulate what we want in it. We articulate the ideas, and then there's actually attorneys who are very trained in writing legislation and drafting it. You send it to those drafting attorneys at this, for the state level, you send it to the legislative drafting council, whatever they call them, I forget the name right now. There's a whole set of attorneys trained for that. But you tell them your bullet points and what you want in there, and then they make sure it's put in. And so the actual translation process from idea to legal work, that's actually probably the simpler part. The bigger part is, what are the core concepts that we agree on that we're going to run with as a community, have those conversations. And it takes a lot of conversation, which is why the website is helpful to have. And hopefully we can start putting content on that and having discussions and things that flow.
But also, sorry, if anybody has like a top 5 that they want to send to the website anytime, or even one thing or questions, that's a really good place to send them. And that's just OgdenValleyCharter.com, but there's also an Instagram with the same name, Ogden Valley Charter, and you can send messages to that as well, so.
So, in the beginning, you likened this to a constitution. So running with that analogy, I would imagine the first thing we need to do is get the agreement that we want to have one.
Okay.
And even if that's just saying, yes, we want to have one, and we want to pass some very, very basic things, here's 2 things that we can all agree on. What's the process of them amending or adding to things later? Like if we grow more as a city and we say, okay, we need to actually do something else and put something else in there, how do you do that?
Yeah, great question. So to change it later, you actually get to decide that in your first draft. So your first draft, so the U.S. Constitution said how it would be amended. Your first charter does need to say how it's amended later. So you can choose to make that be a vote of city council and a vote of the people. If you do that, the chance of ever getting something, an amendment in that hurts the city council is basically no. So it's something to think about. Right now in Utah, the constitutional amendments have to pass through the legislature and the people. But it makes it very hard for us to amend anything and put a check on the legislature because they don't want it. But your charter can say, you know, it can be a weak charter, we can amend it with 30% vote. It can be a super weak one, it's just all over the place. It could be super strong, it takes 95% vote. I don't recommend that either. It's a little bit too strong, probably could break your city. And so those are the provisions, but most people, I think, fall at about 2/3 vote to amend. But you put that in the charter expressly what amendment takes.
And you're saying that the public vote and stay away from things like the city council and all that.
Yeah, because most of the time you're amending the charter to further restrict the city council, and if they have to approve it too, it just makes that a significant hurdle to say, oh, how do we get them to approve it too? Because then there's just a body of a few people that can control what everyone has to do. So, I don't love, and the U.S. Constitution has both routes. It has Congress and the states, and then it has just the states. So, that is our time for today. We want to make sure there's time for the next meeting. So, thanks for coming out and listening. If you want to ask questions specifically, you can hang out.
If you don't if you're not in District 4 or 5, you're not gonna be the next meeting, Austin, you can go out there and